Aunt Polly was looking for Tom. She looked here and there. She looked under the bed. She could not find Tom anywhere. She went to the window and looked outside in the yard. She shouted, "Where are you, Tom?" There was no answer. "I must find him and find out whether he went to school or not." When she turned to go to Tom's bedroom, she heard a noise behind her. She turned around and found Tom. She shouted, "What have you been doing in the kitchen?" Tom said, "Well, I have done nothing." Aunt Polly said, "What's that on your face?" Tom said, "I don't know." Aunt Polly raised her voice. "I've told you many times not to eat the honey. Why don't you listen to me? If you eat honey too often, we will have to pull out all your teeth. Don't you understand me?" As Aunt Polly raised her hand to hit Tom, he said to her, "Look behind you, Aunt." Tom pointed behind her. Aunt Polly looked behind her and saw nothing. When she turned back, Tom had run away. Tom was already climbing over the back fence. "Oh, that boy! I never know what he will do next," she said to herself. Aunt Polly has been taking care of her two nephews since her sister died. Sid was a quiet boy, but Tom was different. He was a troublemaker. Aunt Polly always thought it was her duty to make a good boy out of Tom. Since Tom ran away from her without listening to her, she decided to punish him. That afternoon, Tom did not go to school. It was such a fine day that he went swimming in the river. So he came home early. When Aunt Polly saw him, she said to Tom, "Did you have a nice day at school, Tom?" "Yes, Aunt Polly." "Wasn't it very warm at school?" Tom said, "Yes, it was very hot today." Aunt Polly touched Tom's hair. Tom said, "It was so hot at school that some of us poured water on our heads. My hair's still wet, isn't it?" Aunt Polly said, "I'm glad you went to school. After supper, you can go out and play." After supper, Tom went out. While he was walking down the sidewalk, he saw a new boy in town. He was a stranger to Tom. The boy was coming toward Tom. He was dressed from head to toe in fine clothes. The boy was much taller than Tom. His hair was combed, and he was wearing a new suit, a nice shirt, and shiny shoes. He seemed to be from a rich family. Tom looked at the boy, and then he looked at his clothes. He suddenly felt like a poor beggar. Tom stood right in front of the new boy. Neither of them said a word. When one of them moved, the other also moved. Finally, they were face to face and eye to eye. "Step aside," Tom said. "Make me," the boy said. "I can beat you." "Do it." "I can." "No, you can't." "Yes, I can." "You can't." Tom stared at the boy and said, "Is that a hat?" "Throw it into the trash basket." "Hit it off my head if you can." "I will." "You're afraid, aren't you?" "No, I'm not." The two boys were rolling in the dust, hitting and kicking each other. Tom was sitting on the boy. Tom kept beating him and said, "Have you had enough? Shall I beat you more?" The big boy began to cry, and his nose started bleeding. Tom shouted, "Have you had enough?" The boy said nothing. "Enough!" Tom shouted again. "Enough!" the boy cried. Tom let the boy stand up and go. "Be careful after this," said Tom. When Tom turned to go home, a stone hit his back. The boy had thrown it at Tom. The boy ran away into his house. Tom kept running after him, but he failed to catch him. Tom waited for him in front of his house. Tom was going to beat him up if he came out of his house, but his mother came out and chased after Tom. "If you don't get away from here, you will be in trouble." Tom kept running toward home. When Tom entered the house through the window, Aunt Polly was there waiting for him. Aunt Polly heard from Sid that Tom had not been to school that afternoon. She decided to make Tom work on Saturday. He would have to work all day, painting the whole fence by himself. Aunt Polly thought she was fulfilling her duty of raising Tom the right way.